The Orlando Magic are not good, and as a result of them being not good, Evan Fournier is number one on our list of 5 underrated guys who could be moved in this upcoming trade deadline. Now, the unfortunate thing for Orlando is I don't think Fournier is actually a part of the problem because he's a balanced offensive player. I used to believe that he could be a 20-plus point scorer. I don't know if I think that anymore, but he can definitely be a solid 16 to 17 point guy who at times you can put the ball in his hands and he can do some work, but he can also play off ball, be a 3-point shooter. He can really create his own offense as well, but he can make some plays for others. He's just a solid dude who, if he's your best offensive player, which he might be for them, well, then you got problems. But if he's your third best offensive player, then you're looking pretty good. And I do think that teams could use him. But like I mentioned earlier, the problem for the Magic is they could really use him because they struggle on offense already. But he is maybe the only guy on the team who warrants a first-round pick. Because I don't think Vucevic does. I don't think Elfrid Payton does. But I do think someone could be willing to give you one for Fournier. But then, then that makes it a little tougher for the Magic to replace that offense. But given how bad of a team they are, they could use as many first-round picks and the salary relief. So I could see someone doing it. Now, his $17 million a year contract, it's a little bit of an overpay. But I do think a desperate team looking for someone who can create some offense would be willing to move something in order to get Fournier. So it's a name to look for this upcoming trade deadline. The next one is all the way in New York with Willy Hernangomez, a center who was beginning to show some exciting signs last season. He's a big dude who shows a decent amount of craftiness around the basket with post moves, hook shots, turnaround jumpers, decently physical guy, a strong rebounder, and someone who I think can be an effective offensive rebounder for somebody. But the fear with Hernangomez would be, what can he be on defense, right? And the reason I talk about him is because the Knicks are loaded up front. There is Enes Kanter, Kyle O'Quinn, 2 names who the Knicks have been using a lot, and then you have Hernangomez, who's a pretty young dude who I think a team that isn't that good would be willing to at least take a flyer on him. But it'll depend on what the Knicks really want. Do they think Enes Kanter can be their starting center for a longer stretch, at least past this season? Do they think Kyle O'Quinn is the guy who should be coming in off the bench? Maybe O'Quinn should be the starter. Maybe they think Hernangomez is actually better than both of them. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see, but similar to Jahlil Okafor, I think teams recognize that Hernangomez's defensive woes could end up being so bad that it doesn't matter, but his offensive ability could be enough to where you at least make the attempt, and if he can become something on defense, then you got yourself a pretty decent player. Now we have to talk about Tyreke Evans, a guy who I talked about before this season, and I mentioned that you shouldn't sign the guy. Well, I was wrong, okay? Tyreke Evans is having, I think, his most efficient season ever, as he's shooting very well from outside on like 5 attempts a game. But the other thing is his turnovers are down. His turnover percentage is around 11%, while his usage rate is nearly at 30%. That is some very efficient basketball, and I typically don't put Tyreke Evans and efficient in the same sentence, but Tyreke has been good. He's been a real creator for the Grizzlies. He's made others better, and he hasn't done it while over-dribbling or causing a whole bunch of turnovers or not recognizing the proper thing to do on the floor. Maybe there's a mismatch or something. So why would the Grizzlies move him? Well, it's because they're really bad, and he's on a 1-year contract, and it's safe to say that Tyreke is going to be gone after this season unless he's content with just putting up numbers on a bad Grizzlies team. And given that he's only making $3 million a year right now, safe to say he's going to want to go to free agency and cash out on this really good season he's having at 28 years old. it would make sense for the Grizzlies to get ahead of the curve and trade him for maybe a young player, maybe a draft pick of some kind. You wouldn't get too much for a guy on a 1 year, but you could get something for Tyreke Evans nonetheless. Next up, we want to talk about Dewayne Dedmon and the Hawks. Similar to the Grizzlies and the Magic, not a very good team. And I think you could get something for Dedmon, and I think a lot of teams could use Dewayne for what he does as a defensive player, a rebounder, and someone who doesn't do too much on offense, but when you ask him to, he can at least finish around the basket, and his three-pointers have actually been kind of okay this season, so I guess there's that for you. I mean, I think he would be great on the Cavaliers. I don't think it'll actually happen, but a team like that who's just desperate for some more defense, Dewayne Dedmon would be totally fine, and I could see him getting moved at the deadline. And finally, we're going to talk about Malik Beasley of the Denver Nuggets, who is probably the most underrated player here. Beasley has not played much for Denver because they just have so many perimeter guys with Jamal Murray, Emmanuel Mudiay, Will Barton. If you wanted to slide him over at the 3, they've had Wilson Chandler. It's been tough for him to get in there, but Beasley, according to a lot of people who pay attention to some of the more not as known prospects in the league, say that he has all the potential in the world of being a real two-way player. The question would be his shot-making abilities, but in terms of his defense, his ball handling, and his effort, it seems like Malik can be something. So I could picture one of these bad teams just acquiring a shooting guard who could really turn into something quality for them. I mean, I don't know what his real ceiling would be. Perhaps like an average starter in the NBA, which, I mean, that's fine. You know, if you can find another Courtney Lee type of player in Malik Beasley, potentially. Defensively, sure. Offensively, might need some more work, but something in that vein with which he can be, I mean, hey, who wouldn't want that type of guy, right? So we'll have to see. Denver hasn't really found a place for him, and a lot of people do know the potential that Beasley has.